Have you ever lost a loved one under strange circumstances and been left wondering what happened to them? For your sake, I hope not, but for the last 141 years, a community in New South Wales has been left with a baffling mystery about what happened to 5 men who disappeared without a trace. My name is Grace, and I find mysteries fascinating, but many of them remain largely unheard of, especially Australian ones. So please stay and let me tell you one of the weirdest stories that you will ever hear. Just a disclaimer, I used books, these ones here. I did use websites and also articles from the time period to get what information I can, but it isn't easy to know which version is the most accurate. At least 2 articles published at the time in the 19th century turned out to be false and had to be retracted. As for the timeline of events according to the 3 books I used, well, pause if you want to read this next slide. Okay? And when I searched my local library for more information, super! Book on bushwalking. It's going to really help me. This video will be talking about people who have died, so please bear that in mind before you continue. Thank you. In spring 1880, gold was found near Bermagui, New South Wales. Naturally, a lot of people immediately started flocking to the area to try their luck. The New South Wales government sent 2 of its workers from the mining department, Lamont Young, a geologist from England, and Max Schneider, an adventurer from Germany. They set up camp on hills above the goldfields. They met several people while checking out the goldfields, including Senior Constable John Berry, who invited them to go fishing. After lunch on the 8th or 9th of October, remember, I haven't got the precise information because those books differ, Schneider returned to the camp and was apparently never seen again. And later in the afternoon, around about 4 o'clock, Young also returned to the camp, and again, he was apparently never seen again either. On the 10th of October, at about 4:20 p.m, William Johnston was riding his horse along Muttonfish Point when he saw something glinting by the shore. He found a green boat at the edge of the beach. When he noticed that his were the only footprints in the sand, he naturally realised that something was off, and so he rode to a nearby dairy farm owned by Albert Reed and brought him back. They found a book in the boat as they investigated it, and on the flyleaf inside was Lamont Young's name. Well, of course, they alerted the police, who waited until the next morning to investigate. Senior Constable Berry, of course, was one of the men who came along, and he recognised Young's name inside both of the books because they did actually find 2 books in there that belonged to him. The boat itself was identified as belonging to Thomas Towers, who was from Bateman's Bay, which is about 100 kilometres up the coast. A man named John Ross reported that he had seen Towers, William Lloyd and Daniel Casey, all from Bateman's Bay. He'd seen them fishing in the boat on the 10th, though the Geelong Advertiser did not state whether he saw Young and Schneider with them. So, what was found on the boat? Let me get my glasses on so that I can look official while I read this list to you. And this is not a complete list, this is just what I've been able to find through various sources. So there were 2 books belonging to Young, papers belonging both to Young and to Schneider, a compass, makes sense, part of a German almanac, and a German calculating tablet, and we know that Schneider was from Germany, so they probably belonged to him. The mast of the boat, as well as at least part of its sails, some say it was the full sails, some say it was just part of one, and the oars of the boat, which were actually lashed into the boat, they were tied down with rope, and there was also an extra coiled line that was sitting on the edge of the boat. There was human vomit in the stern, 2 bullets, which were actually in opposite ends of the boat apparently, at least 1 sack of potatoes, clothing, including an oilskin coat and a single boot, 2 picks and a prospecting dish, a saddlebag with a small blue bottle inside, which contained what they considered to be a mysterious liquid, a tent which possibly belonged to Young because we know he did purchase one, flour, tea and sugar, and one of the most bizarre things is that there were about 5 heavy stones also in the boat. On shore they found the remains of bread and biscuits, a cigar holder which we know belonged to Young, and it actually contained a cigar which had been recently lit, the impression in the sand of a man lying down and propped up on one elbow, which also, by the way, was right beside a bullet. More clothes and food scraps were found in the nearby scrub, and there were also tools apparently scattered on the sand. Not placed nicely, but scattered. Most importantly, though, and for some people most weirdly, no blood at all, and no signs of a struggle. Despite the bullets, no blood. What the heck happened? A later search, conducted by a civilian named Alexander Gray, along with a friend of his, went on a 3-month search of the area. In that 3 months, they turned up a surveying instrument called a theodolite, don't ask me what it's for, and a pair of trousers, and 2 2.4 metre long poles, one of which apparently had bloody fingerprints on it. Now, this was a while after the initial searches had been conducted by the police and other people who had, helped trying to find the bodies. So, the bloody fingerprints on the pole, is this something that they missed? Were these things like the surveying instrument and trousers there all along and somehow missed in the initial search? We just don't know. One thing that the police found was that the boat had holes created in it from the inside. Not accidentally created from the outside by hitting a reef or rocks in the water or anything like that, but from the inside. They could tell in those days. Experts said that it looked like the boat had been deliberately steered to the beach, which would make sense if they had been out and decided to go to the beach to have lunch. Then they just left their things there? What happened to them? Whatever happened obviously must have taken place when they went to shore. But why on earth were holes put in the boat? And if the holes were in the boat, why did they need to put rocks in it to keep it stuck there? If it floated off, it wouldn't have gone far before filling up with water and sinking. A lot of people accused the 3 fishermen. Some people thought that it was Schneider, presumably because he was German and, always had that tricky history with Germany, I suppose. And of course, out of the 5 of them, the one who had the highest station and rank in life, Lamont Young, was naturally never suspected of anything. Towers, Thomas Towers, remember he owned the boat, his brother-in-law believed the popular theory that they were all poisoned somehow. Now remember, in the boat they did find a saddlebag which contained a small blue bottle. A government analyst says that the contents of the bottle was oil of copaiba. And I apologise if I didn't pronounce that correctly. Oil of copaiba is an essential oil which many people use for healing. I'm going to bring up an important point that I didn't mention before. Lamont Young had been ill. He'd been ill before setting off to Bermagui. He seemed recovered enough in time to be able to make the trip. But before that, he'd had some kind of possible infection, which included vomiting, spitting up blood, and back pain. If any of you have enough medical knowledge to know what that might be, please let me know in the comments, because I'm very curious. So, did this little bottle of oil of copaiba belong to him? Was he using it as some kind of cure? Because what else could he do in 1880? And did he accidentally somehow pass on the infection to Senior Constable Berry? Because he had to take 9 days of sick leave after investigating the scene because he came down with a fever and vomiting. The Metropolitan Police in London were asked to investigate by Lamont Young's father, who was a Major General in the army. Major General Young pushed and pushed, probably for the rest of his life, to try to find out what happened to his son. But the Met simply wouldn't investigate. They had enough faith in the New South Wales police force, so they just offered a £300 reward, £100 of which was contributed personally by Lamont Young's father. In fact, his mother even ended up writing to Queen Victoria herself to ask for help. They were desperate to find their son and never got any answers. No one could provide a motive for the 5 young men to have killed each other or for anyone else to have killed them. The newspapers reported that Lloyd had £15 and that Young had £40, and £55 was quite a lot in those days, and you had a lot of people in the gold fields who were there to try and find gold to make money. But would they have known that those men were carrying that amount of cash on them? And do we have any confirmation that they had that amount on them? Because the bodies were never found, the cash was never found. How do you kill 5 men, potentially in broad daylight, hide the bodies completely, and get away with no one ever even suspecting that you were involved? People scoured the beach for days, they searched caves that were nearby, they even used dynamite to blow up holes, hoping that that would somehow reveal where the bodies were hidden, that it might send them flying up into the sky. There was a fence for miles on either side going along the coast. So if someone had strolled in from the ocean, somehow, Aquaman, I don't know what he was up to then. If anyone had wandered in from the coast, they couldn't possibly have gotten lost. There was a fence there. It would have taken them to a settlement somehow. They couldn't have wandered off into the bush and been eaten by dingoes or a bunyip or a yowie or a drop bear. It just couldn't have happened. At least that's what the police said. So, what happened to the bodies? We know that there was an ocean right there because it was a beach. Were there some very fast-moving currents that they could have been dropped into? Could they have been dropped from a height, from the cliff that was above this cove? If so, how on earth would you get the bodies of 5 men up there and drop them? It'd take a very, very strong person. No official suspects were ever named, and the bodies, as I have said, were never ever found. It doesn't help that there was some initial confusion over who should be doing the investigating, because the goldfields themselves had their sort of own faction of the police. Even so, in the 1880s, there was little that could be done forensically, and as a result, we don't have any of that stuff still hanging around today to investigate, as far as I know. Interest in the story was renewed in 1887, when bones were found near Bermagui, but they were never officially connected to the case, and people at the time weren't even sure whether they were bones belonging to someone who was Caucasian or someone who was Indigenous Australian. So, you just don't know. In 1972, Corunna Point, which is where the boat was found, was officially renamed Mystery Bay. In 1980, a memorial was built there to the 5 missing men, exactly 100 years after their disappearance. Every year, a group of people get together to discuss the case and come up with new theories about what might have happened to them. Lamont Young left behind his parents, a wife and 2 children. Thomas Towers left behind a wife, 4 children, and a 5th one on the way. William Lloyd left behind his wife of only 5 months. Daniel Casey and Max Schneider left behind family and friends. They all died without knowing what happened to their loved ones. They died without answers. What do you think happened to the men who disappeared from Bermagui? Leave your theories in the comments below, and let me know if you want another video on another obscure Australian mystery. Stay safe, and happy Christmas.